The worst punishments in human history. Okay, I'm sure these are going to be bad. Let's see how bad they are.
Number 10. The Rat Dungeon. If you were alive in London, England during the medieval period, you would have definitely heard about the Rat Dungeon, since this punishment struck paralyzing fear into the hearts of even the most hardened criminals. This was a cell that was located at the bottom of the London Tower, where prisoners were shackled and chained in complete darkness. But here's the thing, the dungeon was connected to the nearby river and just below the river's waterline, so that when the water levels rose, all the rats that lived along the riverbed would be pushed out of their shelters and forced to swim downstream. This would of course lead the hungry and angry rats towards the entrance of the dungeon, where they would then come face to face with the prisoner. But to the unlucky prisoner, he never actually saw anything, and all he would hear were the soft scurries of the rats' feet entering the dungeon. And in a matter of minutes, these soft noises were in the hundreds and all around him. These angry and aggressive rats would then begin to take small—
Oh, that's disgusting. Oh, can you imagine that? You're literally chained up. You're like, oh, okay, listening to the lovely quiet sound of the River Thames on the riverbank. And then you just hear the little scratching. So, oh, what's that? What's going on? Oh my gosh, the rats! And there's so many rats around you. Oh, and then you get eaten. That's embarrassing actually. That's an embarrassing way to go. Because normally I think, oh, a rat, I'm gonna take a rat out. You see the videos of like in New York, the rats in the subway. You're like, oh, okay. They look more funny than anything. I mean, they're huge, but they look funny. But these guys, these like English rats it's probably because they got bad teeth. That's what it is. Bad teeth, and they can just eat you easily. Yeah.
Small bites from the prisoner, who had no way of defending himself. Now, he might be able to shake the rats off for a few hours, but eventually the prisoner would pass out from pure exhaustion. And while he slept, the rats would continue to take bites from his flesh. Eventually, when he would wake up, he would discover hundreds of bites throughout his entire body. But it didn't stop there. The prisoner was left here for days or weeks on end, depending on his crime. But towards the end of the medieval period, this form of punishment just got more and more deranged, eventually becoming a form of execution, where prisoners would just be thrown in the dungeon and forgotten about. Number 9.
Goodness. So you literally just sit there while you're getting eaten. That's so bad, because you have to sit through the entire day, where the rats obviously go back to their little houses, or their little holes, their burrows. And you're just chilling there and you look at yourself and then, oh, my arm's gone. Okay. And then you wake up the next morning, you're like, oh, my other arm is gone. How unfortunate. That's what a British person would say.
9. The rack. This was yet another punishment.
The rack. Yeah. That sounds horrendous. Ooh, the rack.
That took place in the London Tower. The rack was a torture device that was used in many places throughout history. This form of punishment was originally designed for getting a confession, usually from criminals, slaves, or prisoners of war. The device looked like a large ladder, but instead of secure steps, they would actually rotate like a rolling pin. You see, when a prisoner was placed on the rack, he would have his feet and wrists tied to a ratchet pulley system, where 2 legal officials would slowly tighten the ropes and locking them in place, placing an increasing amount of strain on the prisoner's shoulders, hips, knees, and elbows with every single turn. This was all done to get information, but of course, a lot of the times the truth was not accepted as reality, and the prisoner would then begin to say whatever he believed the officials wanted to hear. Sometimes it would work, and the prisoner
walks down with spaghetti limbs. You know, I actually know so many boys nowadays who'd actually just do that, so just so they could go be like 6 foot, 6'1" or something. Right, come out with spaghetti limbs. That's so bad. Oh my goodness, that'd actually be a horrible way to go though. Like, you just get your joints popping out eventually, and then you just start saying whatever you want. Oh, bad way.
The prisoners would be let go, while other times they would be tortured even more for lying. When the whole ordeal was over, prisoners were usually released with dislocated joints, but oftentimes they were left completely paralyzed. That was the case in England in 1447 when a 25-year-old girl named Anne Askew would be tortured on the rack for hours and hours on end and left completely paralyzed after all her joints were dislocated. She was then carried on a chair and burned alive at the stake. All this because she read and memorized scriptures from the Bible, which she preached in private to a small group of women, which were the exact women she refused to name and expose during her torture. You see, during this time period, if you followed
terrible.
any religion other than the Catholic Church, you better not say a word to anybody, including your own husband, which was the person that turned her in.
Oh my goodness. That's not very Christian of you, my friend. Damn, you got snitched on by your own husband. That's crazy. Damn, that guy's horrible. That's not good at all.
Now we are getting to the part of the list where living is no longer an option. This form of punishment has been used by many countries throughout history, but was most recently used by India in the 19th century.
Well, they've got a lot of
which is really
elephants,
not that long ago if you really think about it. Like, your great-grandma could have witnessed one of these.
My great-grandmother. Oh my goodness. Maybe she was. She was definitely that woman where when people like tied up at the wooden blocks with their hands out the side, she was the one throwing the tomatoes. That was her. Well, I never met her, but she would have been that person.
What type of crimes would you have to commit to be crushed by an elephant, you might ask? Well, apparently if you failed to pay your taxes, that was good enough. And of course, stealing or being an enemy soldier was also a great way to become a tortilla. But the most disturbing case in history was when the 4th Mughal Emperor of India ordered an enormous amount of criminals to be crushed to death in a single day, simply because he was bored and needed some entertainment. The guy who forgot to pay...
That's so bad. Oh my days. I mean, there's no excuse. Like taxes, that should not be punishable by crushed to death by elephant. You should not be tortilla-fied for not paying taxes. That's... Ugh. I mean, they used to do horrendous things to enemy soldiers. But taxes? Come on, guys. And for entertainment, certainly not. I mean, but that I guess what that was literally what the Colosseum was. So maybe I'm just being nitpicky.
To pay his taxes, crushed. The man who stole an apple from the local market, crushed. The little orphan who jaywalked across the street, crushed. The man who murdered his neighbor and added his remains to a large pot of tomato soup, then fed that soup to his family and watched them eat it from the shadows with a creepy smirk on his face. He's alright. Apparently he makes a damn good soup. There are a few ways that this public execution goes down, but one thing always stays the same. There's always a guy on top of the elephant controlling its every move. And this was very intentional, as this was meant to showcase just how amazing the ruling class were. I mean, look at them.
Oh, it was more of a show of strength. Okay. I see. So it's not like... I mean, there's no justification, but it's not just like an elephant set loose on people. There is generally a reason why the population is told to watch this by the horrible aristocrats of the time. So it was like show strength to keep everyone in line, which is it's horrendous. It's horrendous. But yeah, there's no but. It's just horrendous straight up.
They can control an elephant. Now be impressed. The first method of execution was the one that you better pray for if this was going to be your fate. Here, the criminals would have their arms tied behind their back and their heads placed on a pedestal, where it was then crushed like a grape by the elephant's foot. Now, the second method is much more cruel. The criminal would be placed flat on the floor with their arms tied behind their backs. Then the elephants would be guided to walk over the person's body, and hopefully the criminal would die on the first go. But sometimes they just end up crushing a leg or an arm, so the elephant then has to make a U-turn and try again. And
I've never heard someone you have to U-turn an elephant. Well, you're gonna put your turning signals on for that as well, like. You need to get your driver's permit for the elephant. Yeah, okay. That's like terrible punishment, but that's funny wording.
Number 6, impalement. Probably one of the grossest and most cruel forms of punishment on the list. This has been used by a few countries throughout history, but was most recently used in Egypt in the 17th century, usually against criminals that were highway robbers, grave thieves, or anyone who would try and start a rebellion. This punishment would start by having a criminal lay flat on their stomachs with their arms tied behind their back. They would then be sliced open with a razor to increase the size of their back door. And as soon as that incision was made, the cut would be lathered with paste to instantly stop the blood. They would then thrust in a long wooden stake
No, don't do that.
that was the width of a man's
gross.
arm, which was sharply tapered on one end. They then begin to hit the wooden stake with the mallet, pushing it further and further in. And of course, the stake was greased up beforehand to make this process a lot smoother. And once the stake has popped out of the criminal's shoulder, head, or mouth, they were pretty much long gone. He is then planted next.
Oh, that's so gross. I mean, that's again. I feel like these punishments are all just like shows of strength from the ruling class to keep the underclasses in line, which is a horrible way to govern, I must say. Oh, that's the thought of it is disgusting.
Number 5, Poena cullei. Poena cullei is Latin for penalty of the sack. And that's exactly what it was, just a lot more terrifying and cruel. This was an exclusive punishment for anyone that would murder their own family members. This was first seen in the 2nd century in Rome, but would later be used by the Germans in the 18th century. This all begins with a convicted murderer being placed inside a thick leather bag. But just to make sure the man isn't lonely, they would then add a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. I don't know what these animals did to deserve this, but hey.
I was going to say, why are they adding animals in there? Why is it not just a solo dolo experience? Why do you go in with the whole crew? Like, what's the... I don't know, you need the squad with you? This is like a full team lobby or something?
At least the evil family murderer doesn't die alone. Once all the animals are added inside the bag, it is then sewn shut, creating an almost airtight seal. Now you would think this would be horrible enough, but no, this is just the beginning, because as soon as the bag is sewn shut, it is then tossed into the ocean. But don't worry, later on, these murderers would be given the option to either be placed inside the leather bag or be sent to perform at the Colosseum, where they can perform the act of being mauled to death in front of all of their loved ones and peers. You know, at least they had the option.
What a choice. That's a really, really generous choice there. Wow. That's overwhelming humanity on display there. Wow. Being tossed in the ocean all of a sudden is not that bad.
Number 3, gibbeting. The last known use was in the early 1900s in Afghanistan. This all came to light in 1921 when the National Geographic published this image in their magazine. This was all...
Oh my goodness, you can see it. Whoa, I thought the cage would be... the bars would be further apart so you could see them, because in my head the idea of that is to again, like the elephants, like show a force of the ruling class. But I guess if you can't really see them, well, you still know what's going on, but I would have thought they'd be more on display. That's still horrific though.
Also used in the United States from time to time during the 17th and 18th century. One notable example was in Boston, Massachusetts, where a few pirates were hung at the Boston Harbor, which served as a warning to any sailors that were approaching Boston. Now let's talk about...
Bro, that literally would have warded me off. If I ever thought about being a pirate, I look at the cages, I say nope, and turn back around, go home, be a baker. That's what I'm doing.
England, since they love this form of punishment so much. In England, this was used on traitors, murderers, pirates, and thieves. But after the year 1752, the Murder Act was passed, which required that all convicted murderers must be put to death by being publicly dissected or by gibbeting of some sort. And over 134 confirmed people met this fate. The most common form of gibbeting were actually cages, and they looked like this.
Whoa, okay, so that's exactly, there we go. That's what I was expecting more. It's like more open, you can actually see the person in it. You can't even sit down, that's the worst bit. You're like constantly standing. So you're there for like days, unable to move, claustrophobic, and you're just standing. Your legs can be screaming in pain after a few days. I reckon, you're just displayed. At that point, all your humanity is taken away. You are just a display feature.
Number 2, Scaphism. This was a form of punishment that was used by the ancient Persian Empire on anyone that would be convicted of murder. First, the criminal would be placed inside of a boat on their backs and tied down. The boat had 4 holes cut out so that the person's arms and legs would be outside of the boat and in the water. They were then force-fed large quantities of honey and milk until their stomachs were visibly full. They would then proceed to lather their entire body with the milk and honey as well. After all these steps were completed, he was then pushed out to the middle of the lake where he was completely exposed to the heat of the sun. But the sun would soon become the least of his worries. You see, the reason they fed him milk and honey was not because it was a great last meal, but because this combination causes a person to get extreme diarrhea, which mixed with the sweet honey attracts rodents, bugs, wasps, bees, flies, and whatever other animals live near the lake. After being tormented by the animals throughout the entire night, you would think that the daytime maybe gets a little better. No, because as soon as the sun rises the following day, the person inside of the boat gets another gigantic meal of
No, surely not. You can't. Poor guy. He's eating well. He's done bulking season with the milk and honey diet. That's disgusting though. You get all the rodents, all the flies, all the insects like on you, eating you up. Ugh. And then the next morning you're fed more, and it just continues. You just continually get eaten up and just... Oh, the whole thing is disgusting.
Milk and honey and an additional lathering. This would be done on a daily basis to prolong the punishment for as long as possible. It was also well documented that the rodents would continuously attempt to burrow inside of the person through their back door. They were probably trying to get a head start on their next meal. A writer named John Sonaris wrote in great detail about one of these incidents. He would go on to say that it was one of the most horrid and cruel forms of punishment, since it was terribly long and seemed to have no end in sight. He wrote about a man who survived for an entire 17 days before he...
17 days? Are you joking? 17 days? You actually just get eaten up by like rats, bees... Oh, that's disgusting. You're on a diet of milk and honey for 17 days. Oh, at that point, after 17 days, you're hoping the rats eat you. Like at that point, you just want it over with.
Number 1, the oubliette. Oubliette simply means to forget in French. This was a punishment that was used in many places throughout history, including in the London Tower, which had a...
Again, the London Tower with... The English were always on the worst ones. That's so bad. Oopsie, I guess.
Small and confined room called Little Ease. Not only was this room pitch black, it was also so small that prisoners could not sit, stand, or lay down while inside it, and they would be left in this uncomfortable position for days on end. One of the most famous oubliettes is not the one in the London Tower, but in the neighboring district of Warwick, inside of Warwick Castle. Here, deep underground in the castle's dungeons, is a very small and narrow cell, completely made of stone, which has a metal door to close it shut. Prisoners were tossed inside of the cell and forgotten about, as the name implies. The prisoner would just have to sit there and wait for their inevitable death, which usually came in a few days from dehydration.
I was gonna say, dehydration is the first thing that's gonna take you out. That is so gross. You sit in a hole and you just stay. It's a solitary confinement, but I mean, it's just gross. WVid, oh my goodness, I'm trying to think which punishment would I want to go through. The oubliette sounds the least bad in some ways because you're just sitting down, you're not getting your head crushed, you're not being paled, rats are not eating you, you're not drowning, you're not getting scratched up from keel hauling, but somehow if it's prolonged suffering, that's also horrendous. I feel like the boat one when it's like water, the milk and honey, that seems like one of the worst. Also, the being impaled seems actually just horrendous. Like how anyone could do that is so bad. Oh my goodness. Oh, some of those were disgusting. But anyway, good video, amazing video. Like, subscribe. Thank you for watching.